They polished the floor so fiercely that morning that Rose could see the chandeliers doubled beneath her feet, a world of candlelight inverted and trembling. She had dusted those very candles at dawn, fingers smelling of beeswax and lavender, counting each glass drop as if an extra bead might have fallen from heaven and found a place among the rest. The Golden Hall did not forgive fingerprints. It did not forgive hesitation. She knew this, the way she knew the weight of a copper kettle or the temper of a starching iron. She adjusted her linen apron, straightened the tuck at her waist, and smoothed a wisp of auburn hair back beneath her cap. It sprang free at once. She pinned it again with the spare pin she kept tucked in her cuff. A junior maid, Hetty, passed with a stack of napery so white it seemed to glow. "Keep to the lower stair, Rose," Hetty whispered, eyes bright with gossip. "They say there'll be trumpets enough to crack the plaster. The regent means to make a show." "A show?" Rose asked, though the word pricked like a needle. "He will speak," Hetty said importantly, "about the heir and his marriage. They say he will name her by noon." Hetty's gaze skimmed Rose's apron and slipped away, as if the cloth itself might be caught listening. A footman with shoulders like a carriage horse hissed at them both to clear, and they did, vanishing into the pattern of the room, servants becoming shadows cast by great ladies, shadows that moved only when the light allowed. Rose took up her station by the lower stair, near enough to see without truly being seen. That had been her mother's rule, passed down with the thimble and the darning needle. Watch everything, meet nothing head-on, and always look as if you belong even when you do not. Beyond the doors, carriages drew up in a braid of wheels and hooves. The air tasted of snow, though the sky was bright. Silk rustled like leaves. Laughter rose and fell in rings. The master of ceremonies rehearsed the order of precedence under his breath, names fanning out like cards. Dukes, marquises, earls, viscounts, with their ladies and second sons and daughters bright as porcelain. Rose kept her eyes on the work of others. A pair of footmen aligned a table to the inch. A maid lifted a fallen glove with a handkerchief, so the kid would not scuff. She memorized the gestures. She added them to the other things she had learned since coming up to Windsor. How to vanish behind a screen when a door opened with the wrong knock. How to fold napkins into roses fit for princesses. How to starch collars so stiff a man could hide his fear behind them. Then the trumpets sounded. There were 3, and they blared not like a war but like a proclamation of summer, bright and golden in the throat. Conversation flattened. Fans paused, half open. The court turned as one body toward the dais. The Prince Regent did not hurry. He came as if the room owed him its breath. He was tall still, his hair silvered without apology. He wore the crown as a man wears an old friend, familiar with its weight, unastonished by its occasional cruelty. He took his seat. Beside him stood his son, the heir, Prince Edwin, hands loose at his sides, gaze neither lowered nor lifted, as if he had learned the trick of seeing everything without appearing to stare at anything. Rose had seen him twice, once in the chapel where he bowed without extravagance, once in a corridor where he had paused to let Mrs. Penbury pass, though she carried only a basket of mended stockings. Those 2 moments had drawn a small, neat outline around him in her mind. Now the outline filled and shifted, and became a man who belonged to the room without letting it swallow him. He wore no jewels, save the signet ring that caught and held a blade of light when he moved his hand. "Attend," called the master of ceremonies. The trumpets fell silent. The regent rose, and with him a murmur. Rose felt it on her skin like a draught. He lifted a hand, and the murmur died. His voice carried without strain, old mahogany polished to a mute shine. "On this day," he said, and every syllable landed in the hall like a coin. "On this day I speak not only to those before me, but to those who come after. There is in a crown the weight of many hands. We are borne up or borne down according to whom we take into our house." Fans dipped. Men shifted heels. A lady somewhere tittered and was silenced by a glance from her mother. "My son is of an age to choose a bride," the regent went on. "And there are among us families of sterling rank and honor. Yet I will not treat this matter as if it were the choosing of horses or stones. It is the choosing of a life, and the choosing of the one who will be joined to our name." Rose felt the floor beneath her feet, felt it as if it were no longer stone but water. The room shone too brightly. A muted laugh broke like a mirror somewhere near the windows. "Therefore," said the regent, and his voice did not warm though the word invited warmth, "I declare before you, before God and before the people, that whoever my son chooses shall marry me. My house, my name, my destiny." The last word hung. Destiny. It sounded like a thing that could not be changed. It sounded like a door that never squeaked, because it never moved. There was a beat of silence, then a scatter of reactions, each one too small to name and altogether loud as a storm. A whisper of scandal, of expectation, of old alliances tightening their gloves. A gentleman's cough could be scorn, a dowager's blink, a knife. Rose's heart made a single hard movement. She reminded herself to breathe. She put her hand flat against her apron to hide the trembling. She was safe in the lower stair, a worker in clean linen, invisible. Prince Edwin stepped down from the dais. He did not look to the front ranks, past duchesses and their daughters, and courtsmen with fob watches smooth in their hands. He did not turn to the left, where Lady Beatrice Ashburn stood in a shade of blue that had cost 5 letters and 2 Paris dressmakers. He did not choose the obvious. He came forward, the crowd's attention bending toward him like wheat to weather, and he walked the length of the Golden Hall. Rose's mind emptied. She felt every inch of apron against her, the stiff band at her waist, the weight of the spare pin against her wrist. He passed the dukes. He passed the ambassadors whose silence translated into a dozen foreign languages before the echo reached the walls. He came to the lower stair. He stopped where the servants stood. He did not look over their heads. He looked at their faces, one by one, as if he were counting, and found he could not, because to count would make them into points and not people. He saw the footman who had worked 2 harvests before serving cider on silver. He saw Hetty, neck blotched with fear. And he saw Rose. She had grey eyes. She had always thought them a practical colour. They saw, and they took in, and they did not long to be admired. Now those eyes reflected guilt and shadow and a prince. She did not drop them fast enough to make herself safe. He was already looking, steady as if choosing his next breath. "Miss," he said softly, and though 6 women in silk might have claimed the honorific, he meant it for her. "Do you trust my heart?" It was an unfair question in a golden hall. It was a strange question from a prince. Her mind tried to catch hold of rules. One does not speak until spoken to. One does not presume. One does not suppose that the heir to a throne is addressing a maid as if only she were present. "You should not ask me," she heard herself say, low enough that only he could hear. "You should ask yourself." His mouth tilted, and something unguarded flickered there, something not trained by tutors. He lifted his gloved hand, palm upward, as if offering nothing and everything at once. "If you trust my heart," he said, "take my hand." Time behaved badly. It stretched thin. It snapped. Rose saw, as clearly as she had ever seen a scuffed boot or a chip in a teacup, her mother's hands. Not young hands. Hands that had taken linen damp from the line and shook it once to make the wrinkles fall away. Hands that had lifted a child and set her on a stool and said, not unkindly, "Look, look at how the world is made. Now do not be broken by it." The laughter reached her and stung. It was not cruel yet. It was not kind either. It was that particular rustle that says, "This cannot be serious, and if it is serious, we will make it less so with our noise." A fan snapped shut near Lady Beatrice. She smiled. The politest detonation in England. Rose's fingers moved before she knew that they had chosen. She set her hand in the prince's palm. The glove was warmer than it had any right to be. Perhaps he had stood near the fire. Perhaps his blood ran at a pace she could not match. His fingers closed lightly around hers, as one might close them around a fledgling that could fly or could not, and you never know until you lift your hand. A sound moved through the hall, not a cheer and not a groan. It was astonishment drawn out like thread. The regent's advisers forced their faces into neutrality so quickly that the mask itself showed. The Lord Chancellor's jaw settled. He looked at Rose, as if she were a line of ink that must be removed without smearing the entire page. "Your name?" the prince asked quietly, and that steadiness loosened something in her knees. "Rose Hartwell," she said. His lips shaped the syllables with gravity, as if he had just learned a word that might be used to save a life. "Rose Hartwell," he repeated for the room, though he did not raise his voice. The words travelled. They carried on gossip and on disbelief, and on a few small suppressed smiles that had no business being pleased. He lifted their joined hands slightly, not high enough for display, only high enough to make the gesture undeniable. He turned with her to face the dais. Rose's breath felt like work. The hall seemed 3 times its actual length, like a corridor in a dream. Her apron suddenly announced itself to her, coarse where silk would be smooth, plain where brocade would be storytelling, honest where everything around her was embroidery. She did not blush. She was past blushing. She was white through like linen in hard light. Somewhere to her right, a man stifled a laugh. It made a choked noise like a bird that had flown into glass. Rose did not look. She watched the steps to the dais. She had scrubbed them before, knelt with a bucket and a brush. She knew the place where one gold leaf had been repaired and could not quite hide the seam. The regent's expression did not change. He raised one hand, just as he had at the beginning. His ring flared. His palm was steady. The master of ceremonies inhaled. So did the court. Rose felt every eye fold over her, like a shutter closing. She could not imagine another life, not backwards, not forwards, that would not be rearranged by this moment. There was prayer in her bones, and defiance in her throat, and her mother's simple counsel, which had never mentioned princes or destinies. The regent's hand hung above them, commanding quiet, and Rose understood that every future breath might be taken beneath that gaze. The hall spilled them all like pearls from a torn necklace once the regent's hand fell. Courtiers streamed into corridors thick with their own perfume, voices quick and bright, the way voices are when the thing said is more dangerous than the person saying it. Rose kept close to the walls. The prince had released her hand as one releases a bird once its wings have learned what air is. He did not vanish. He turned aside to a knot of men with tight mouths and older eyes. She saw his profile once more, set and calm. Then a silk sleeve closed her view and the crowd took her like a tide. "Did you see?" "A maid," someone breathed, the word a marvel and a stain. "The regent will rescind it by supper." "Let him," said another softly cruel voice. "It has done its work. We all know his son's appetites now." "Perhaps she is clever," said a third, kinder or merely bored. "Perhaps she will learn." Rose pretended to be deaf. It is a skill learned in service. It does not protect you from the feeling of being struck. By the time she reached the service door, the laugh in her ears had become a buzzing. She pressed through into the cooler dark of the passage, where the plaster smelled of lime and old wool, and the stones held winter like a swallowed secret. Inside the still room the air was lemon and lavender, honey and vinegar. Shelves lined the walls with jars of preserved peels and syrups and syringed flowers. A kettle clicked softly as steam relaxed into itself. Rose closed the door and put her back to it. Her knees did not quite give, but they argued. She found the nearest stool and sat, pulling her apron into her lap as if it could be a harbor. She did not mean to cry. She had never approved of tears in rooms where work was meant to be done. But the air was so gentle here, and the hall had been like a furnace, and the words had been hot enough to mark. Her face folded, and she pressed one hand to her mouth to keep the sound small. Tears slid into the fine interstices of linen and left a little coolness where they clung. She was grateful for the smallness of the room. She could look only at shelves, not at 1,000 eyes. The door opened with a familiar scrape of wood. Mrs. Penbury did not ask permission of hinges, when permission was a kindness and not a rule. She carried a cup of tisane and set it beside Rose's knee without comment. She did not look at Rose's face. She looked at Rose's spine. "Up," she said, brisk and soft at once. "Up and breathe. We cannot have you remembering this day as the one when you folded." Rose lifted her head, furious at her own wet cheeks, more furious at the relief that made more tears, as if the first ones had greased the rest. "They laughed," she whispered. "They did," Mrs. Penbury said. "They laugh at illness, and at poverty, and at youth. They will laugh at old age when it is in someone else's hands. Drink." The tisane was bitter under sweet, lemon peel and something green that always promised to help, and then did, but not fast enough to satisfy complaint. Rose swallowed carefully. The heat steadied her mouth. "I do not know what to do," she said, and that was the first honest thing she had said to anyone in hours. Mrs. Penbury set her own hands on the table. They were square hands, unpretty in the way of tools that have been used exactly for what they were made. "We will teach you not to be broken, That is the first thing. Stand." Rose stood. Her apron slipped. She tightened the knot at her back. "Now," said Mrs. Penbury, stepping behind her. She took up Rose's hair, loosened it from the pins, and repinned it without pulling. "Chin not too high. There is pride, and there is pride that invites slaps. We will not invite. We will not bow our heads to make it easier to be struck either. Here." She turned Rose to face a narrow mirror propped against a jar of sugared violets. Rose saw herself as if the glass, too, had an opinion. Grey eyes, too pale now with crying. A mouth that had been told to be quiet too often and did not know what it looked like when it spoke. The linen apron, honest as anything in the castle. "Curtsy," Mrs. Penbury said. "Not to the glass, to yourself. To the girl who came from a cottage with floors you scrubbed on your knees, and who now will walk into rooms with floors polished by 10 such girls. Curtsy, so that when they make you do it in front of Jules, you will not also have to learn how not to hate yourself as you bend." Rose breathed and bent, not too low. Mrs. Penbury's hand hovered at her shoulder and then fell away when Rose found the exact balance between yield and refusal. "Again," Mrs. Penbury said. Rose did it again. The room gathered itself around her. The tisane breathed lemon. Her heartbeat slowed enough to fit back inside her chest without pounding to be noticed. "They will put you to tests," Mrs. Penbury said. "Some will be of the body. Hours of standing, heat, cold, a dress that weighs a child. Some will be of the tongue. Some will be of the heart. You cannot prepare for all. You can prepare for being looked at. That is the one that undoes the strongest. You are looked at and you become the looking. Do not. Remain, Rose Hartwell, inside your own head. The rest can be ironed." Rose made a sound that might have been a laugh if it had not been so raw. "And if he is wrong?" she asked. She could not say the prince. The word had too much reach. Mrs. Penbury met her eyes in the mirror. "Then you must not be. If he is wrong, you must not make his wrongness the excuse of your falling. You will need to learn twice the speed of the ones who have been taught since they could walk. I have seen you read a ledger and correct it in your head because the steward had his wine behind his eyes. Do as much with this." Rose turned, quick, as if she had been caught out. "I have read the order of precedence," she said, almost pleading. "The ways to address, but the table settings, the dance steps, the way they hide insults in kindness. I do not know the words for the kind of poison they drink." "Then we will find the words," Mrs. Penbury said. "There are books. There are women who know and will not admit they enjoy teaching. There is me. And there is your own good sense, which is rare in rooms like that." Something steadied further inside Rose, like a tray returned to its stand. "Will you show me?" she asked. "The curtsy for a princess? The way to hold a fan so that it does not look like I am clinging to a plank in deep water?" Mrs. Penbury's mouth twitched, which was as good as laughter. "I will," she said. "And I will fetch you gloves that fit, and teach you to keep your shoulders down when your dignity wants to creep up to your ears." The door opened and closed again. Hetty slipped in, breathless, as if she had been chased by a cat made of whispers. She held a sealed note in both hands as if it would bite if it were mishandled. "For Rose," she said, eyes too wide. From a footman. He said from higher up, but he would not say who. Only that it must be put into your hands and no other." Mrs. Penbury took the note, weighed it, and passed it to Rose, without a flicker. Rose recognized the seal before she let herself name it. The signet had impressed wax, as if pressing it could press the world into the shape desired. She broke it carefully with one nail, so the edges would not crumble and betray eagerness. "Miss Hartwell," it read, in a hand that did not adorn its letters because it did not need to. "For the sake of propriety and preparation, I ask that you meet me at first light tomorrow in the orangery for instruction. Yours in truth." Rose read it twice, 3 times, as if the letters might alter under repeated looking. The room grew very quiet in the space between breaths. First light, instruction, propriety. The words fell like steps she could take, even if the floor were made of water. Mrs. Penbury's hand hovered over the paper and then retreated. "At dawn," she said. "You will want to sleep, you will not. You will go to bed at once anyway. You will lay out what you will wear, linen that is not quite so honest it becomes a flag. You will do as he asks, and you will do as you must, which is learn, and you will not be late." Rose nodded. It was something she could do. It was not walking into the golden hall with the world in her mouth. It was learning to hold a fan. She folded the note and slid it into the pocket on the inside of her apron, where she kept straight pins and string, and the coins that made up the distance between hunger and a meal. She felt its edge and the shape of the seal, broken now, and no longer a complete circle. "I will need books," she said, "on address, on French terms to avoid so that I am not laughed at for misusing them, on dancing, and gloves, and to know where to put my eyes when a lady is angry with me but calls me dear. Books we can find," Mrs. Penbury said. "Gloves we will measure. As for eyes, you will look at the space just to the right of hers, enough like attention to soothe, enough like refusal to save your soul." Hetty made a small noise that might have been admiration or fear. "They were monstrous in the corridor," she whispered. Lady Beatrice smiled as if her teeth were jewels. Rose tasted the name like something bright and bitter. She had seen the blue dress. She had seen the fan close with a click like a tiny trap. "They will set snares that look like help," Mrs. Penbury said. "Do not put your foot in a voice. Answer slowly. Count the breaths in your head. If you cannot remember the words, curtsy. It buys you 3 heartbeats every time." Rose let out a breath she had not known she had been holding since the hall. The still-room windows showed a slice of winter sky, pale and blank as a page. She thought of a little room in a cottage, of a mother who had never seen Windsor, and never would, who would have scolded Rose for crying and then given her the better half of the bread anyway. "I am afraid," she said. "Of course," Mrs. Penbury said. "Courage is doing the next necessary thing while afraid." "I do not want to bring harm to him," Rose said, the truth flushing her cheeks more than any insult could. "They will use me to strike at him until I am shards." Mrs. Penbury looked at her plainly, as if seeing the shape of a wound and the shape of the scar that might close over it. "Then be stone," she said. "Not glass. Not harder than you must be, for stone can crush as easily as it endures. But be a thing that takes a mark and remains itself." Rose took up the cup again and finished the tisane, even though the last swallow was always the most bitter. She set it down with care. She smoothed her apron. Her hands did not shake now. They knew what to do, these hands, even if her heart was still learning. "Teach me the curtsy again," she said. They practiced until Rose's knees ached like a question that had been asked and answered too many times. They practiced the bow of the head that conceded nothing essential. They practiced the measured "Your Grace," and the different flavor of "Your Royal Highness," and the way "My Lady" could be sweet enough to hide the taste of mockery if it had to. When her shoulders finally argued for rest, Mrs. Penbury relented. "Go to your bed," she said, "and lie in it even if sleep will not have you. Think of each thing you will do at dawn. Shoes to be polished, hair to be pinned, words to be stored where your tongue can find them. Tomorrow you will be looked at again. Let them find you ready." Rose nodded and picked up the folded note from where she had set it while they practiced. She slid it deep into her apron pocket this time, feeling the reassuring drag of it against the seam. She turned toward the door, hand already out to lift the latch. The still-room light made a halo of steam around the kettle. The hum of the castle rose again, distant but no less insistent, like a hive that had decided on a dance and would dance it whether or not the flowers approved. She opened the door and found Lady Beatrice in the passage, smiling as if at a child's trick. The orangery held its own weather at dawn. The air was damp and kind, beading on the glass like breath. Orange trees stood in green ranks, with their small suns hanging heavy, and the flagstones kept last night's chill, as if it were a promise. Rose arrived before the light had quite shrugged free of the horizon. Her shoes whispered on stone. She had chosen the plainest of her gowns, and the apron that did not show every crease, and she had bound her hair with fewer pins so that it would not ache under the scrutiny of eternity. He was already there. Prince Edwin stood by a narrow table where someone had laid a pair of gloves, a fan, a square of folded linen, and a book as thin as a lie. He had taken off his coat. In shirt-sleeves he looked less like a portrait, and more like a man who could stand in a kitchen and hold a pot while a woman poured. He turned at the sound of her steps. He did not smile the way a man smiles to ease a frightened animal. He smiled the way a man smiles when a friend arrives on time. "You came," he said, as if this were the point on which the world turned. "You asked," she said, and hoped her voice did not tell him that she had not slept and that her heart had spent the night learning to beat quietly. He gestured to the small assembly of objects. "We will begin with names and with hands," he said. "Names to be placed correctly, hands to be placed nowhere they ought not." A breath of laughter escaped her before she could hold it back. It helped. He picked up the gloves first. They were soft kid, white as washed bones. He gauged her hands with his eyes, then chose the smaller pair. "Yours," he said. "Do not fight them. If you tug, they sulk." Rose slid her fingers in. The leather hugged her and resisted, and then yielded, a series of tiny surrenders. She flexed once, and the glove settled. It was a relief to have something to do with her hands that was not trembling. "The bow," he said, and stood before her as if they were about to dance in a room with no one watching. He bowed as a gentleman bows to a lady of rank he respects. It was not decorative, it was precise. "And you," he said, "curtsy to a man who is not the regent." She bent. The night's lessons with Mrs. Penbury steadied her. She did not lower her head so far that she could not see where to stand when she rose. "Again," he said, and she did it again. "And now, introductions. Speak the title and rise on the name. Her Grace, the Duchess of Ashburn, Lady Beatrice." He waited. "Say it." "Your Grace," Rose said, finding the place in the air where the words ought to go. "Lady Beatrice." She rose. She did not stumble over the name. She did not spit on it either, which felt like a kind of courage. "And if you are presented," he said, "to my mother." "Your Royal Highness," Rose said, her voice small and tidy. She felt the shape of fear like a pebble in her shoe. He nodded, a fractional thing, approval pared down to what a cautious court might allow. "Oh, you need not think yourself less for smallness," he said quietly. "The rooms are large. You will widen as you walk." He showed her the fan. It was a simple piece of ivory and silk, unpainted, unambitious, which was why it seemed safe. "You hold it like this," he said, placing it in her gloved hand, "not as if you were drowning and it were a plank, not as if it were a weapon. It can be both. It is for air and for time, open when you need breath, close when you need to think." She tried. The first opening cracked like a tiny branch. The second was smooth. She practiced opening and closing, the hinge making a quiet music. He stepped back, watched, and then stepped in again. He noticed how she stood. He noticed that she shifted weight to her left foot when she was uncertain. He shortened his stride when they walked the length of the orangery together to mimic an entry. He did not correct everything at once. He touched nothing, and yet altered the room simply by choosing what not to say. "You are very gentle with your instruction," she managed, after they had walked and turned and nodded to imaginary people and survived a set of imaginary eyes. "I am not a tutor," he said. "I am a man asking to be chosen back." She almost missed her step. The orange trees breathed on them both. She stared at a blossom as if it would tell her what answer would be both honest and safe. Honesty, she had already learned, often opened a door and then stood back to watch what entered. "I learned to be quiet because quiet made me safe," she said. "Now I must speak in rooms that wish me silent. Then we will make silence listen," he said simply. They moved to the table. The thin book turned out to be a manual of etiquette, written by a man with more opinions than mercy. Edwin set it aside with a look that said he had been corrected by such men and did not care to be corrected twice. He demonstrated how to accept a glass from a footman without appearing to command him. He showed her where to stand, so that a lady of rank would not be forced to turn her back to the wrong person. He practiced with her the phrases that disarm without provoking. "Your courage does you credit, my lady," he said, in a tone that could smooth or slit. It can be said kindly. It can be said so that she hears only the edges. You must choose which it is before you open your mouth. Rose repeated the phrase. She tried it warm. She tried it cool. She tried it dry, and the dryness made both of them smile. He picked up the square of folded linen. "Handkerchiefs," he said, "are for tears you do not wish the room to own. If you must cry, do it where the walls forgive. If you must not, press here." He tapped the base of his own thumb, where a pulse bided its time. "It gives your body something else to do." She pressed with the glove's seam. Her heart answered like a thing summoned to rehearsal. "You do not condescend," she said, surprised enough that the courtesy might have sounded like accusation. "What would I gain?" he asked mildly. "A performance. I do not want a wife who can only recite. I was taught to speak Latin before I understood why anyone would. I will not do that to a person." She looked at him then without the caution she had been keeping between them like a fan. The orangery made a light that did not flatter fools. He was earnest, which could be dangerous. Earnesty makes banners and cliffs. Yet he seemed to understand that people are not things to be raised like flags. He reached into his pocket and drew out a small box. It was too simple for a jewel case. It did not pretend at satin. He set it on the table and opened it. Inside lay a ring bearing the royal seal. It was older than either of them. The metal had outlived 3 reigns. The seal was clear and unromantic and entirely itself. "This is wrong for your hand," he said, as if confessing a fault. "It will be fitted if you will have it. But I could not go to the goldsmith and pretend this is not what it is." She did not touch it at once. The ring sat in its own knowledge of what history is. The orangery watched. The trees did not counsel. They merely made air and fruit and shadow. "Not spectacle," he said, his voice close but not urgent. "A promise to remain. Not to drag you through rooms and dare you to drown, but to stand beside you while we teach the rooms a new depth." "You speak as if rooms can learn," she said, and did not mean to make him laugh. He did anyway, quietly, grateful. "Rooms learn slowly," he said. "People teach them. Mine taught me both fear and stubbornness. I am tired of the first." She reached then. The metal shocked her with its chill and its heaviness. She could feel the crest in the pad of her finger, the lines cut years ago by a man long dead and still giving orders to mornings like this. She slid the ring onto her finger. It was too large. It stopped at the knuckle and waited there like a general at a river deciding where to cross. She curled her hand and felt the weight settle. "You can still go back," he said, not as a man who hopes to be contradicted, but as a man who can bear to be. "I cannot go back to not being the person I was before you asked me if I trusted your heart," she said. "That person has been looked at by 100 eyes and has not broken. She is still me, but I do not think she can fit beneath the old door." He did not reach for her, which would have undone her. He bowed his head instead, the smallest of thanks. Through the glass something shifted. Rose almost turned and then did, thinking an orange had dropped. It was not fruit. It was a shadow of a man in the colonnade beyond, a shape of dark in a brightness meant to heal. His stance was tidy and officious, and made of corners. Lord Chancellor Harbury held a ledger tucked like a weapon, and watched as if the orangery were a page he must annotate. Edwin saw where her gaze had gone. His jaw set. He did not invite Harbury in. He did not pretend not to have been seen. He returned to the table and lifted her gloved hand. "There is one more lesson," he said quietly. "When a viper looks through glass, you must not freeze. The glass makes him patient. He can wait for weathers to change. You must be the weather." "Is there a book on that?" she asked, and her mouth softened at its own boldness. "No," he said, eyes on hers, and not on the Chancellor's silhouette. "But you already read people better than you read the steward's accounts, and I have seen you correct those without a pencil. Breathe," she breathed. The ring was heavy and wrong and right. He lifted her hand, turned it palm down, and brushed his lips over the glove in a kiss so light it might have been merely air. The door to the orangery banged back against its hinge. A footman stood panting as if he had run the length of the castle, and then remembered at the threshold that men in livery do not pant. He forced his breath into order and bowed too fast for its grace to survive. "Your Highness," he managed. "My lord, my lords, beg your presence at once. The council insists." They separated her from him with the gentlest of blades, courtesy. Before the footman's breath could settle, another had come to say that a small luncheon would be held in the Ashburn salon for ladies of discretion and taste, and Miss Hartwell would be most welcome to pour tea. It was an invitation, and also a leash. Mrs. Penbury appeared as if conjured by the thought of snares. "Eat something first," she said, pressing a heel of bread and a sliver of cheese into Rose's hand. "You do not want courage to have an empty stomach. And remember, 3 breaths buys 3 thoughts. Do not spend them all at once." Rose chewed because obedience is sometimes the only thing that keeps a person upright. She washed at the basin, smoothed her apron, chose the least coarsely woven of 2, and let Mrs. Penbury's fingers make firm order of her hair. She slid the too large ring onto her finger and felt its weight. She wanted to hide it. She did not. The corridor to the Duchess of Ashburn's suite smelled of Parma violets and something sharper. the perfume of women who had paid to smell expensive. A footman with a serious nose took her name as if it were a delicate thing and announced nothing. He merely opened the door. Rose stepped into a room that had been decorated to teach the word elegance to people who had money and were not sure how to spend it. Silk walls shimmered the color of pale water. A harp crouched like a gilded bird in one corner. A table had been laid with porcelain thin enough that the light explored it. The Duchess sat with her hands folded in her lap as if at prayer, which made the room into a chapel whether it wished to be or not. Lady Beatrice stood near the window, the blue of her gown cut to make even brave people look twice. "Ah," said the Duchess, her voice a soft bell. "Miss Hartwell, you are good to come. We are all friends here." She made the word sound like company, in which one must still measure every bite. Rose curtsied as Mrs. Penbury had taught her, neither subservient nor sharp. "Your Grace," she said, rising on the name, "Lady Beatrice." She turned at the exact moment to include the others. A dowager with eyebrows like upright exclamation, two young ladies whose gloves looked like a second skin, a lady-in-waiting whose smile could have sliced ribbon. "Pour for us, do," Lady Beatrice said, as if offering a kindness. "We are starved for good hands. The palace is overrun with trembling ones." A laugh rippled. Rose crossed to the urn. Steam lifted and curled. She measured out tea leaves as if the moment were a recipe and not an examination. Her bandaged wrist, the one Mrs. Penbury had wrapped after yesterday's scald, held steady. She poured without spilling, gave the Duchess her cup first, then Beatrice, then the room in order of rank. The kind of order that had nothing to do with spirit and everything to do with who sat where and why. Lady Beatrice turned her cup slowly, watching the dark surface as if it held answers that would arrive if stirred. "What a brave apron," she said finally, voice light, eyes not. "So honest. Honesty is a virtue. And linen, I am told, shows every stain, which is such a useful lesson to carry into life." Rose set a saucer down where it would not wobble and let herself take one breath, 2, 3. "Linen takes a finer press," she said. "It also breathes. I have not found that true of velvet." The dowager's eyebrows lifted further, which seemed anatomically risky. The lady-in-waiting's mouth twitched and then smoothed. One of the young ladies coughed to hide a smile. Lady Beatrice did not move at all. She could have been practicing stillness as a weapon since infancy. "I have always admired the fortitude of those who make do," Beatrice said. "It is a school of virtue that spares one the distraction of triumph." The Duchess placed 2 sugar lumps in her tea and stirred once. "We are all, each in our way, students," she murmured. "Some of us graduate." Cousin Arthur drifted in like a scent that pinched the nose. He was not related to Rose, but to everyone else who counted as if their pedigrees were threads in the same tapestry. He bowed to the Duchess, grazed Beatrice's fingers with a kiss held exactly as long as gossip takes to ignite, and took up a seat at the edge of the gathering, where men who knew their worth sat and listened. "News from the council," he said to no one and everyone. "Paper moves. Men shuffle it. Great seriousness is applied to signatures. Do tell us when they finish arranging the future," Beatrice said lightly. "We will try to sit very still so as not to crease it." Rose kept pouring. She kept the pot at the right angle, the stream thin, the risk of drip managed. It gave her something to do while panic tried to climb her throat. She did not look at Arthur. She watched the cups and the hands that reached for them. Hands tell the truth, while mouths compose. "Arrangements sometimes outlast the reasons for them," said the lady-in-waiting, pretending to talk to her saucer. "The question is whether one honors the paper or the people." The Duchess's stirring stopped. The spoon touched porcelain with a sound that made the hairs on Rose's arms rise. "Paper steadies the world," she said. "People make it shake." Her eyes drifted to Rose's hand where the ring sat, too large, a declaration that did not bother to ask permission from the room. The harpist, a girl barely older than Rose, began to play a tune meant to be background, and succeeded because Beatrice had chosen it. It was clean and practiced, and had no blood in it. Rose placed the last cup and stood where she had been put, not quite among them, not quite out of the way. She felt the orangery still within her, his voice still inside the skin of her ear. "Miss Hartwell," Beatrice said suddenly, as if she had pulled Rose's name from her pocket to examine it and perhaps exchange it. "What did you make of the Regent's declaration? It was so novel." Rose could count the lies in the words. She could also count the eyes now resting on her face. She chose a safe truth because safe truths are ladders when the floor has been set to tilt. "I heard him," she said. "I took the words as meant for me only when the prince spoke to me. Before that, they were a room full of sound." "And now they are what?" Beatrice asked. The question balanced on a fingertip. "Words I am obliged to learn to live inside," Rose said. "Like anyone who hears a promise made and must become the kind of person who can keep it." "Very fine," Arthur murmured. "So practical. One could almost forget this is a fable and not a ledger." The Duchess looked past Rose to the doorway. As if summoned by the glance, a small boy in Ashburn livery darted in, whispered to his mistress, and darted out again like a messenger in a battle painting, whose presence makes the scene both official and urgent. "Forgive me," the Duchess said to the room, with a smile that forgave nothing. "We have had our own papers at the council these many months. It is fatiguing to move treasure without spilling, is it not? An arrangement is a delicate cup to pass hand to hand." She placed her cup down. The gentle sound of porcelain on porcelain trembled in the air. "To prevent embarrassment on all sides," she continued as if announcing the weather, "an engagement will be drafted today, for all our sakes." The young ladies blinked. The dowager made a small sound, like a chair leg scraping a floor. Beatrice's lashes lowered and lifted, as if bowing to an invisible partner. Rose felt heat move into her face, and then leave again, taking feeling with it. She found Mrs. Penbury's advice in the place where panic had wanted to live. Look just to the right of the eyes. Count 3 breaths. If you cannot find words, curtsy. She did not curtsy. She did not move. "That is wise," she said, though the words tasted like tin. "It spares what can be spared." "Ah," Beatrice said softly, with the admiration one gives a child who has just stood without help. "Such sense. One might almost believe you have been practicing your poise for years." "I have been practicing my balance on narrow stairs," Rose said. "It is a transferable skill." The harp played a melody that once had been something a shepherd sang on a hill, and now had been sanded smooth for a salon. Rose kept her hands folded so that no one could see the ring slide a fraction and threaten to fall. She pressed her thumb to it, and it settled. Another door opened, nearer this time. Lord Chancellor Harbury stepped inside without apology, because he was the sort of man who considered apology a form of theft. He bowed as much as his joints allowed to the Duchess, and less to the rest of the room. "Your Grace," he said, "forgive the intrusion. Matters move and must be shepherded." He glanced at Rose very briefly, and in that glance wrote 3 sentences, none complimentary. "Do summers move?" the Duchess asked dryly. "Or do men pretend to arrange them?" "Both," Harbury said. "One must time harvest." He withdrew as smoothly as a knife from a sheath. The message he carried with him stayed in the room like a scent that sours the air. Rose felt the walls contract and expand. She had the sensation of standing in a dress that belonged to someone else and trying not to trip on the hem. She could not bring herself to meet Beatrice's eyes for fear of finding pity there, which would be worse than perfect disdain. The lady-in-waiting leaned toward Rose as if to smell the tea. "There are as many ways to be married as there are people who have done it," she said very softly. "Some of them are survivable." Rose nodded without knowing what face to wear. Her own felt like a mask that had been left on a radiator. A little commotion at the door saved her from crafting a reply. A servant, not Ashburn, not Palace, but a runner sent by the castle's inner machinery, skidded to a stop before the threshold and remembered abruptly that rooms like these do not like to be startled. He waited to be noticed. The Duchess flicked her eyes at him. He crossed to her and bent so low his words could not be called speech. The Duchess's mouth curved in the barest suggestion of sympathy. She lifted a finger, and the boy turned to Rose. "For you, miss," he said, and offered a folded paper on a small tray that had been pressed into his hand to make the errand look like a ritual instead of a collision. Rose did not want to take it. She did. Her name was inked on the outside in the same hand that had written Miss Hartwell, the Orangery, First Light. The seal was not the signet. It was the Chancellor's, the wax a sullen red. She broke it. The words inside were few, each one placed as if with a chisel. "Return the ring tonight, or the announcement goes forward tomorrow without you." The paper scraped her skin as if words could be knives. "Return the ring tonight, or the announcement goes forward tomorrow without you." She folded it once, twice, until it felt like something small enough to swallow, and slipped it beneath the waistband of her apron, as if her own body could hold back the tide of it. The rest of the luncheon moved on without needing her. They were expert navigators of other people's storms. Rose curtsied again at the door, though she could not have said to whom, and escaped the way water finds a crack, not fast, not slow, simply with intent. She did not go to the still room. She did not seek Mrs. Penbury's counsel, though it was a compass that had already saved her from spinning. She walked toward air. The castle's corridors, with their tasseled gravity and portraits that watched, had begun to feel like a practice in breathing through cloth. She wanted sky uncurtained. She wanted earth under her shoes that no steward had ordered swept for an archduchess. The East Gardens gave her both. Their alleys of box and stone urged quiet, not out of ceremony, but out of respect. A fountain spoke to the afternoon in the voice of water that is content to repeat itself. A hawthorn hedge, winter bare but already thinking of spring, traced a low, thorny line below windows high enough to house opinions. Rose's hands found each other in front of her, and did not know what to do with themselves. The ring sat at the base of her finger like a steady weight, like a word that would not stop being said. She turned it, and felt her skin complain. She thought of taking it off and could not. She thought of never taking it off and could not. The difficulty was not the metal. It was the vow it represented, made by a man to whom vows were bread and breath, and accepted by a woman who had never before stood at the center of anyone's promise. A crunch of gravel. She did not turn. She knew that sound already. He had a way of walking that did not hurry and did not prove itself with noise. He came to stand beside her, not in front. The air shifted as if to include him without disturbance. "I did not send for you," Edwin said, quiet in the garden's old ear. "Forgive me that I came." "I did not know where else to go," she said. "The walls carry words. The hedges keep them." He looked down at her hands. He saw the twist of the ring and the reddened skin. His mouth hardened and softened at once. "They wrote to you." "They did," she said. She could not say the Chancellor's name in this clean air. "They are efficient men. They can set the hour of a sunrise if one gives them a pencil." His breath made a cloud in the cold and then disappeared. What did the paper say? She wanted to lie for the space of 3 breaths, to be spared hearing her own voice put his danger into the world. She could not. "Return the ring tonight, or the announcement goes forward tomorrow without me." He closed his eyes for one heartbeat, long enough for patience to collect itself again. When he opened them, they were not on fire. They were a steadier light. "They have been drafting that announcement for a year," he said. "They wanted to place it as one lays a stone. I have stepped where they did not expect me. Stones are easily offended." "I do not want them to crush you to make their point," Rose said. She surprised herself by the heat in it. She surprised herself again by not apologizing for the heat. "I do not want to be the excuse they use to harm you. I am not made to be a cudgel." "No," he said. "You are not a weapon. You are a person. That makes you dangerous only to men who prefer their world arranged like furniture. I am not offended when the chairs are moved." She laughed once without joy. "Chairs do not write letters." "No," he agreed. "Men do. Men who have never watched someone like you learn a room's measure and hold it to account with a steady hand." She stopped twisting the ring. "They will say you chose me to defy them." "I could have defied them with a dozen other choices that would have cost me less," he said. "I could have chosen a widow whose name would provoke, but not scandalize. I could have chosen a foreign princess who would confuse them into courtesy. I chose you because you were the first truth I had seen in a room bred for performance." She had nothing for that for a moment. Truth is often a kind thing said, like a blade. It cuts away what is not essential and leaves a person cold and known. "You must think of your house," she said, and the word felt strange in her mouth like a borrowed glove. "Of your people, of what a crown owes to a country. I have learned these phrases in the last 2 days, as if they were new prayers, and I do not know if I am pronouncing them wrong." He turned to face her fully now. The winter light found every honest line in his face. "A crown owes its people many things," he said. "Among them the habit of choosing what is right because it is right, and not because it looks beautiful in a painting. If I do the first and cannot teach the second with joy beside me, then I will teach it with stubbornness alone. I would prefer joy." She wanted to reach out and find his hand because her own hands wanted work, but she knew that to do so would empty her of words. She kept them close. "They will ruin me," she said. "If they cannot use me to ruin you. They will ruin me so that I will be the cautionary tale whispered to any person who forgets herself and looks up from her work when a prince speaks." His jaw shifted. "They will try. You are not ruinable in the way they think." "You have not seen me cry in the still room," she said. "I am ruinable, I'm afraid." "Courage," he said, "is a habit in frightened people." Then, with the carefulness of a man who knows the weight of small words, "I do not ask you to be used. I ask you to be yourself. The rest we will do together." Silence held steady between them. The fountain measured it with water. Somewhere high, a shutter clicked open. Someone, or several someones, observed. Rose did not look. Edwin's gaze flicked once upward and then settled again on her face, alert without flinching. He had been raised where eyes were a weather as real as rain. "You must not decide for me," she said, finding the sentence by touch. "I am trying not to," he said. "I am trying to tell you what I will do if you decide for yourself, and it makes men in wigs cough into their papers. What will you do?" "I will stand with you," he said, not lifting his voice, which made the words more profoundly heard. "I will ask for formal acknowledgement in the Golden Hall. If the hall refuses, I will ask again, correctly, until their refusal is an error of etiquette. If they strip me of favor for my insistence, I will wear that stripping as if it were a uniform. I will not recant." It sounded like a man describing an afternoon's work he had already planned. She felt both heartened and warned by it. "What if I cannot bear it?" she asked. "What if the looks are a weight and the laughter is salt, and I cannot carry this and the world both?" He took one step closer, not touching. He did not mistake how much space costs a person when everyone else feels entitled to it. "Then we will not carry the world," he said. "We will carry only what is ours. There are rooms in this place where no one will intrude. There are gardens, this one and the ones beyond it. There are dawns and evenings that belong to no chancellor. There is my mother, who knows certain varieties of sorrow and will not, I think, allow this variety to make itself comfortable." Rose's eyes lifted at that. "Your mother," she said slowly. "I do not know which of her faces I saw in the hall." "You saw the face that holds the nation's breath," he said. "It is not her only one." He smiled, brief and private with the past for company. "She taught me to read when my tutors made letters into punishments. She taught me to apologize to the cook when I called a dish by the wrong name, not because it embarrassed me, but because it demeaned someone's work. She has been a queen longer than I have been a son. She knows what it is to stand where the floor is watched." As if conjured by her own mention, the princess mother appeared at the far end of the path, not accompanied by a procession, but by a single lady-in-waiting who walked 2 paces behind and kept her eyes on the gravel as if it told stories. The princess mother did not approach them directly. She took a parallel walk, the way polite people do when they do not wish to overhear, and will do so anyway because ears are not doors. She paused by the hawthorn. She touched a branch with one gloved finger. "Early," she said to the air. "It budded early last year as well. The gardeners will be insufferable if they can claim credit." Her voice carried without targeting. Rose bowed her head just enough to be seen to have manners. "Your Royal Highness," she said. Her mouth remembered the shape Mrs. Penbury had taught. Her heart learned another. The princess mother did not turn fully. She glanced, a winter sun through thin cloud. She saw Rose's bandaged wrist. She saw the too large ring. Her mouth made the smallest shape between sternness and sympathy. "The hedges are kind," she said to the hawthorn, "but they do not keep everything. Wind and words both find paths." She looked at Edwin with an expression he returned as if fluent in it. Then she resumed walking, turning at the next alley, never in such a way that she did not remain in sight. "She tests me," Rose whispered. "She tests everyone," Edwin said, and there was no complaint in it. "She also protects, often by letting a person show herself." Rose looked back at the fountain and the hedge, and the stretch of light that did not belong to the Chancellor. The folded paper at her waistband burned like a brand. She took it out. She unfolded it. She held it so that the words faced the air as if they might be tamed by daylight. "I could give it back," she said. "I could take the ring off now and return it, and then the arrangement would be announced and you would marry a woman whose name fits next to yours like a piece of furniture in a plan. I could go back to polishing floors that reflect other people's decisions. I could make a virtue of disappearing. You could, he said, the first admission of grief not at the idea, but for her. And you would still be yourself. You would still be the woman I chose when I was told to choose a title. She looked at him, grateful for the sentence and irritated with its gentleness because it made crying easier. She did not cry. She pressed the place at the base of her thumb where pulse and pressure can confuse each other. If I falter, she said, and the words shook like a bridge in wind, do not despise me. He flinched, not from her, but as if struck in some inner place the court would never see. If you falter, he said, I will steady you. The princess mother paused again at the end of the walk. She did not turn. She reached into the hedge and brought out a single hawthorn twig, careful of the thorns, as if reminding anyone who watched that beauty without difficulty is for paper, not for people. She gave it to her lady to carry. It was an approval in a language that did not sign its name. Rose put the Chancellor's note back under her apron and felt that it could not decide whether to be heavy or light. She took a step closer to the fountain and looked at the water. It did not change for pronouncements. It did not freeze at frowns. It went on making its small, patient law. Tomorrow, Edwin said, they will blow trumpets and read words as if the wind carried them here from a mountaintop. I will speak. I will ask for acknowledgement in language that cannot be dismissed. I cannot promise you that they will be pleased. I can promise you, I will not be cowed. She nodded. She did not trust herself to speak. She felt the shape of her next breath. It had a weight and a warmth. It felt like a decision not yet with a name. They walked once around the square of the fountain without talking, the way people do who have said too much and enough for 1 hour. He did not reach for her again. She was grateful. Touch now would tip her. At the turn toward the alleys that led back to the world of doors, a footman sped toward them along the gravel with the delicate panic of a man who must run and must not appear to run. His hair had sprung loose at the temple. He smoothed it with a hand that tried to be sober and trembled because it was attached to a person. He bowed, glanced at the princess mother, and then at Edwin, judged which danger to address, and chose Rose. For you, miss, he said, breath puffing in the cold. On his small tray lay a folded paper with a scent that was not the castle's. It had a hint of pear and smoke, the sort of perfume that arrives in a room before a woman says a thing that will matter long after the fragrance fades. The seal impressed in grey wax bore a crest Rose could not have drawn and knew at once. As they parted, a folded paper was pressed into Rose's hand by a scurrying footman, an invitation to a private musicale in Lady Beatrice's rooms. Lady Beatrice's drawing room had been arranged like a kindly trap. The walls wore silk the colour of honey poured thin, and the lamps were shaded to flatter faces. Chairs had been set in a horseshoe so that anyone standing in the open centre would feel both attended to and alone. A harp and a small pianoforte shared a corner like polite rivals. The windows were dressed as if to watch without being caught. Rose arrived with the hour. She had pressed her apron until the linen shone, tied the ribbon at her waist twice and hidden her bandaged wrist beneath the neatness of her cuff. Mrs. Penbury had looked at her once at the door and said nothing except, "Count to 3. Rose held the invitation like a pass into a theatre where the play would end badly for someone, and she must pretend to believe it would not be her. The room filled with women, and with the few men who belonged everywhere. Lady Beatrice stood near the mantel, a cup in her hand and a conversation draped over her like a shawl. She wore a dress the exact blue of a particular sky Rose remembered from a day picking blackberries that stained her fingers beyond washing. Beatrice's jewels were small and significant. They made a statement that did not need the room's permission. "Miss Hartwell," she said in a voice that neither pretended intimacy nor admitted distance. "Thank you for joining us. We are to have music and a poem and then tea, which I trust you will grace us by pouring. You have the hands for it." Rose could hear the blade hidden in the compliment. She did not reach for it. "As you wish, my lady," she said, and curtsied in a way that did not let the floor take her dignity. The singer was a slim woman with a throat like a bell's interior. She took her place at the pianoforte and placed her hands as if about to pray. The first song was chosen to make the room feel good about feeling. It mentioned roses and stars and did not require thought. The second was careful. It told the old story of a shepherdess who attracts a king and learns too late that palaces do not smell of heather. The room smiled with the pleasure of recognizing itself disguised. The third was a ballad. It had teeth. There was a girl, began the singer, born to linen and lie, who climbed a shining stair on a dare and lost her way in gold. The melody moved like a ladder. The words were too precise to be accident. The girl spilled, the girl slipped, the girl forgot to curtsy. The girl was quiet when asked her name, and because of her quiet, they called her proud, and because she was proud, they called her ruined. The verses balanced a moral on a thumb and pressed it home. Laughter rose at the edges, soft, looks exchanged over fans to say, "We see, and we are good enough to pretend we do not." Rose listened in a stillness that was not surrender. She felt the blood pull to her face and then depart again, as if her body itself were correcting for exposure. She pressed the base of her thumb the way Edwin had shown, and her pulse shifted obediently under the pressure. When the last line fell neatly like a guillotine of rhyme, applause fluttered. Lady Beatrice led it with just enough enthusiasm to be innocent. She turned to Rose with a smile that would look generous in a painting. "Tea," she said. "Do serve, Miss Hartwell. We have all had such thirst from so much poetry." The table had already been laid with cups so thin Rose could have read a small letter through them. The teapot was silver, heavy in the way of things that have belonged to a family longer than their virtues. Steam curled from its spout. She took it by the handle. She found the balance and the pour. The first cup was Beatrice's. Rose filled it to precisely 2/3, lifted the pot at the end so that the last drop drew back into the silver instead of falling and making a brown star on the saucer. "Perfect," Beatrice said, admiring a machine she expected to work. The Duchess's last girl slopped. Rose moved along the horseshoe of guests. She gave the dowager 1 lump of sugar without waiting to be told, because the woman's eyes were already saying one. She gave a young lady tea with milk first, because her dress was too pale for stains. She served the singer last because people who are made to sing are always the last to be comforted. Her bandaged wrist twinged once under the weight and quieted, as if remembering that it belonged to someone who needed it to behave. Beatrice watched. The room watched through Beatrice. This is how rooms watch, not all at once, but in segments that amount to a whole. When every cup had found a hand, Beatrice gestured to a small space near the center. "Miss Hartwell," she said sweetly, "a word. We were all so moved by the last song. What did you think of its lesson?" Rose stood where she was placed. The carpet marveled at itself under her shoes. "Songs teach what their singers believe," she said. "Sometimes they teach what a room already thinks and enjoys hearing again." A murmur. Someone's cup clicked too loudly against a saucer. Beatrice's smile altered by a degree no layperson could measure. "And what do you think?" Beatrice asked, gentler. The hook went in by silk. "That rising is not theft if it is an answer," Rose said. "That a person may be called out of her place by love or duty, and that if she goes she must learn quickly and not apologize for learning." It was not defiance, it was not meekness either. The lady-in-waiting from the other day nodded once where she sat, as if marking down a line she wanted to remember. The dowager made a sound like a swallow of approval disguised as a cough. One of the young women bit her lip and then let it go so that her mouth did not look like it had been made to hold back laughter. Beatrice lowered her lashes, raised them again. "One must be careful," she said, "that learning does not become presumption. There are lines. We keep them so that chaos does not ask for tea at the wrong time." Rose did not look at the Chancellor's shadow in her memory. She glanced instead at the harp, at the handprints invisible on its gold, where a player had practiced scales until her fingers made sense. "I am trying to learn where to stand," she said. "If I err, I will do it politely." Something like approval, faint and unwilling, loosened Beatrice's posture for a second and then vanished. From the far door, Lord Chancellor Harbury entered, as if the hinges owed him rent. He bowed minimally and took a place near the mantel, not seated, not attending, a presence like a pin in the map. He said nothing during the music's small encore. He did not drink tea. He existed, which in some rooms is an action. When the applause done for form had finished and the harpist had been thanked with words that paid nothing, Beatrice drifted to her settee. A space opened beside it like an invitation and a dare. "Miss Hartwell," she said. "Sit." Rose sat, because refusal would have been a different kind of performance. Her apron made a neat line. The ring weighed, and she kept her hand still in her lap. Beatrice tilted her head. "You pour beautifully," Beatrice said. "You may never be able to teach that to a princess." "Perhaps a princess could learn," Rose said, "if she wished." Beatrice's smile was all pearl and patience. "Ah, yes, if she wished. The object in such cases is often to wish as one is told." She set down her cup with exquisite care and turned her head a fraction. "Lord Chancellor." Harbury's attention presented itself as if it had been folded and now unfolded with a crack. "Lady Beatrice, Miss Hartwell has occasioned much discussion," Beatrice said, the way a person speaks of weather that has become personal. "We must not let talk outpace sense." "Talk always outruns sense," Harbury said. "My business is to harness it." His eyes cut to Rose. They were the kind of eyes that weigh not to value but to measure for a box. "Miss Hartwell," he said, as if he were inquiring after the health of a plant. "A word, if you can be spared." Beatrice smiled her consent and leaned back as if to watch a small operation performed with clean instruments. Harbury stepped not so close that a lady might protest, close enough that a servant would know he intended not to be overheard. Rose looked just to the right of his eyes and counted 1, 2, 3. "For your safety," he said, voice low and clipped, "withdraw. There is more honor in a quiet departure than in a public correction. The announcement proceeds. A carriage will be made available to you when you are ready to accept the generosity of those who are thinking beyond today's performance." "By safety, my lord," Rose said, tasting the address and finding it metallic. "Do you mean my comfort, or do you mean the lack of inconvenience to those who do not care to be reminded that promises bind both ways?" A woman nearby inhaled, audible and then ashamed of it. Harbury did not blink. "I mean safety," he said. "Do not mistake that I offer it." "Your note offered a choice," she said. "I did not misunderstand its tone." He let his gaze flick to the ring and back. "You misunderstand the scale," he said. "You are a stone kicked loose on a hill. You may think it matters whether you are taken up and placed elsewhere. What matters is whether the path below remains walkable. Go home." Her mouth wanted to say, "I have none." She did not say it. "I will consider," she said, because it was the only answer that did not break something that would be dear to mend. "Do not consider too long," he said, and left the way a door closes. Beatrice leaned in with a mouth arranged for sympathy. "Some men think the world is steadied by removal," she murmured. "They take away what frightens them and congratulate themselves on stability. It is very dull of them." Rose could not tell whether the words were offered as an alliance or as a test. She could not afford to ask. "Thank you for the music," she said instead. "It suited the hour," Beatrice said. "One tries to choose appropriate lessons." She glanced at Rose's bandaged wrist, and for a single beat her poise wavered into something like concern. "Be careful," she said very softly, so low it could be mistaken for the movement of fabric. "The palace is full of small accidents." The gathering dissolved by degrees. Women left in pairs so that departure would look like gossip, not retreat. The singer curtsied to neither Beatrice nor Rose and slipped out as if she knew that rooms take more than they give. The harp made a last little sigh as a string settled. Rose stood when it was time to stand. She curtsied to the Duchess, who had arrived late and left early, which is itself a language. She inclined her head to Beatrice, who returned it with the slow grace of a cat, who cannot be hurried and cannot be convinced it is not royalty. She walked toward the door with her eyes on the space just to the right of whatever face confronted her. In the narrow passage outside, the air cooled. She was halfway to the turn when a maid stepped from a side door too quickly. A tray balanced in her hands, a teapot at its center, sending up a steady line of steam. The girl's eyes widened at the sight of Rose, and her hands jerked a little, enough. The pot tipped, the lid rattled and held, the spout threw an arc. The scalding water struck Rose's wrist, found the edge of the bandage, and bit through to skin with a heat so immediate it was like being found by fire. Her breath broke in her throat, and the gasp that escaped her cut the corridor like glass. Pain is a swift teacher. It taught her the lesson of heat in a single breath. Rose staggered back against the panelled wall, the tray girl stammering apologies that fell like beads and rolled away, useless. The bandage beneath the cuff soaked, then tightened as if to keep the burn for itself. Rose swallowed the sound that wanted to climb out of her throat and failed to keep all of it down. Still room, she managed. Her voice was not a word so much as a direction. They got her there the way a house moves a fragile vase, by intention more than speed. Mrs. Penbury was already at the cupboard when Rose crossed the threshold, the door closing on the corridor, as if shutting out weather. Vinegar, cool and thin, lay in a basin ready. Cloths clean. Laudanum measured to the drop, because too much kindness can be as bad as cruelty. "Sit," Mrs. Penbury said. "Gloves off, sleeve up." She did not ask what had happened because the blister beginning to rise had a vocabulary of its own. She dipped a cloth, wrung it crisp, laid it against the skin with the judgment of a woman who has spun 1,000 aches down to their proper size. The burn hissed under the cool. Rose's breath ended and began again. "It slipped," Rose said, "because sometimes one speaks for the record." "Let us call it that," Mrs. Penbury said, and on the words compacted something that might be anger into a neat, useful shape. "They will, in any case." The room smelled of vinegar and lemon, and the faint sweetness of honey that had once glowed on spoons. The walls drew close in a kind way, like hands cupped around a candle. Rose watched the cloths change from cool to warm, from clean to stained, and return from the basin obedient and ready. "You will say I must not let this undo me," Rose said. The tremor had left her voice for the moment and found her fingers. "I cannot even pour tea without punishment finding me." "You poured perfectly," Mrs. Penbury said. "Do not steal your own credit from yourself. As for punishment, the palace is full of small accidents. We will treat this one, and we will also not forget who was holding the tray and who is newly eager to please people who do not know how to carry cups. That girl will be made to pay for someone else's lesson if we are not careful." Rose closed her eyes. The orange glow of pain pulsed behind them. "I am tired." Mrs. Penbury bound the wrist with clean linen, her hands steady and square. "Of course you are. They are hoping to tire you. Fatigue makes fools and martyrs. We will make neither." "How?" Rose asked, and the word fell out of her like a coin given too quickly, as if paying could end a debt. "By choosing what you can live with in the dark," Mrs. Penbury said, fixing the wrap the way one fixes a loose board. "There is night in every life. Some nights are long halls. You must decide which you will use to cross and which you will sit in until morning. Tomorrow, the herald breathes in. Are you breath or are you silence?" Rose opened her eyes. "I do not know yet," she said. "Then we will build you a place to stand while you decide." Mrs. Penbury tied off the bandage not too tight. "Eat something. Then you will lay flat for an hour. Then you will rise and practice standing. It is work like any other." She ate a slice of bread soaked in milk like a child with a fever. She lay on her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling until the white of it lost its edges, and she became heavy enough to surrender a little. When she woke, the light had moved and the castle's hum had changed key. It was later, or it was earlier in a harder day. The still-room door cracked. Hetty slipped in and closed it with the care of a person inserting a last stitch they hoped would not show. Her eyes were two versions of news. "Half the hall says you screamed because you are soft," she whispered, outraged for Rose, as if outrage could be a shawl. "The other half says you did not scream and so you are hard and the prince will be bored. The kitchen boys are laying bets on what colour the Duchess's carriage is. They say it is already in the mews." "Is it?" Rose asked. Hetty shrugged in the way of people who traffic in what they cannot quite confirm. "I saw a coach with a crest I cannot draw. It looked like money pretending not to be excited." "Thank you," Rose said. "Information matters more than whether it can be used at once." Hetty hovered, wanting to do more. Rose touched the girl's sleeve. "Go," she said. "Do not let me be a reason you are scolded." When the door shut, Mrs. Penbury and Rose looked at each other and did not need to say, "Of course." The afternoon stretched taut. Somewhere pages were written and unrolled and pressed beneath weights. Somewhere a seamstress pricked her finger and was scolded because her blood belonged to a dress a lady would not pay for if it showed. Somewhere the regent rubbed the corner of his eye and did not say that his son's insistence had begun to remind him of a woman he once disappointed. The castle gathered itself the way a body draws a breath before a plunge. A boy came late with a note. He did not know better than to grin at the sight of Rose, new famous without profit. "For you," he said, and held out a square of paper that did not carry perfume or the Chancellor's sour wax. It smelled faintly of clean ink and the last hour in the orangery. She took it and broke the seal. "I will not recant," it said. If they require forms, I will give them forms. If they require courage, I will give them mine, and borrow yours when mine runs thin. If they require cruelty, they will find I am unskilled in it. Be where you can be at dawn. E. Her hand steadied around the paper. She read the lines twice and could have repeated them if called to from sleep. She folded the note and tucked it down where the Chancellor's had made its blunt nest. 2 words rubbed against each other, recant and dawn. The evening brought girls with basin and soap to wash steps that would be walked by people who believed their feet did not touch earth. It brought a hush in the servants' hall that had more weight than laughter. It brought Cousin Arthur's voice near the scullery, bitingly merry, telling 3 versions of the same story in which the girl always lost, and the prince always discovered the value of obedience. Rose passed the doorway and did not alter her pace. She could feel the look slide over her, sticky as molasses. A woman in a plain cap turned her back to Arthur as he spoke and began to scrub the table, harder than necessary, as if cleanliness might fend off unclean talk. That was its own kind of help. In her room, which had once contained a maid whose name the place had not bothered to keep, Rose lit her small candle and set it steady. Her bandaged wrist felt like a tight bracelet. She laid her apron on the bed and ironed it with the care one gives to a flag before a battle, though she did not think the word. She thought only, straight, smooth, honest. When the cloth lay like quiet water, she folded it in tissue saved from a parcel and tied it with thread. She laid it in her reticule, not hidden, not displayed, available. She practiced breathing. She stood with her feet a little apart, knees not locked because locked knees betray. She found the balance Mrs. Penbury had pounded into her bones. She curtsied once to the door, feeling faintly foolish and a little steadier. She spoke aloud the words she was willing to say in a room full of eyes, and she fled from those she was not ready for. She would not learn lines she did not believe. Night ran its thumb over the castle's stones. People went to their beds and did not sleep. People stayed awake and wished to be allowed rest. The great clocks ticked like measured forgiveness. Rose dozed and woke and dozed again, the bandage reminding and then letting her forget. Once she rose, carried by no plan but the need to move, and stood in the corridor while the silence pressed itself into her ears. She returned to her bed, and knew she would be taken out of it again by the castle's will before her own invited her rise. Gossip gathered in small eddies outside her door and moved on. She heard her name and the prince's like 2 coins being tapped to prove they were not counterfeit. She heard the word annal and the word destined and the word lesson used as a threat. She heard laughter near and far. She heard the soft talk of maids who were kind as bread, who said her hands looked tired and that her apron was the neatest thing in the place. She heard Mrs. Penbury step once and felt something loosen inside her just to know that sound. When the candle had burned almost to the brass, when midnight was close enough to smell, a bell tolled from somewhere deep as if the castle were a body, and this, its heart. Rose sat up. The air was colder at the level of her chin than at her hands. The strike faded into a hush that felt deliberate. A lighter step came down the corridor, and with it the scrape of paper against wood. Something was pinned to her door with the small, decisive stab of a tack. She rose and opened it. A herald's boy stood there in livery too large, proud of his task and a little unnerved by her face, as if he had expected either beauty or ruin, and had found a person instead. He touched his cap and fled, his duty fleeing after him. On the paper, in the round script used when rooms must be moved like chessmen, the words stood like small soldiers. Assemble at dawn in the Golden Hall. Dawn began as a rumour. The castle felt it first, stone loosening from the night like a hand unclenching. Lamps guttered in corridors where no one loved them, their light thin and stubborn. Rose rose at the first change in the air. She dressed without hunting for courage. She assumed its presence as one assumes a pulse. She washed quickly, pinned her hair with calm fingers that remembered their work, and drew on the gloves that made her hands look like secrets. The bandage beneath tugged once, as if to remind her it was there, and then behaved. She took her apron from where it lay folded in tissue and did not tie it on. She smoothed it, a palm pressing blessing into linen. She folded it again and laid it in her reticule, an honest square that made the bag's shape less elegant and more truthful. In the pocket of her apron, which she did fasten around her waist because it was the pouch that held both her money and her notes, She placed two pieces of paper that did not get along, the Chancellor's blunt command and Edwin's stubborn promise. The ring slid where it always slid and sat where it always sat, heavy as a decision that had already been made and was waiting for its name. The corridors were cold enough to make a person believe in simplicity. Their breath marked the air, then vanished as if not to take up more space than allotted. She passed a maid who was too young to hide worry and nodded, and the girl's shoulders loosened by a finger's width. A footman, older, touched his forehead, not because he forgot himself, but because he remembered the morning she had fetched him vinegar for a cut hand. People have memories. Protocol sometimes pretends they do not. She crossed into the cloister where the air collected itself between stone and grass, as if deciding whose side it was on. Edwin waited there, not leaning, not pacing, simply present. He looked at her bandaged wrist and the way she held her arm, and something flared and cooled in his eyes like a hearth coaxed beyond itself, and then trained back into steadiness. "I am sorry," he said, and she heard the words he did not use. "I am furious. I am trying not to be stupid with it." "Do not be," she answered. "It made me practice counting to 3. He breathed out a laugh that made room. "You look ready." "I am as ready as I am," she said. "I will not be more before 7. They stood for a moment, like people who had been told to stand and had found a reason. He reached out and stopped before the space where touching begins to cost. "I will ask for acknowledgement," he said, voice quiet and balanced, as if setting a glass where it would not tip. "I will use the forms they teach to children. I will ask them in a language they cannot call insolent. And I," she said, "will speak a language they cannot ignore." He glanced at her reticule. She opened it and let him see the square of linen resting inside, bright even in the slate light. He looked back at her face and understood. "You are going to teach the room," he said softly. "I am going to remind it," she said, "of the first rule. Service," he said, as if naming a thing both old and capable of being polished. "They will not like being reminded that they are supposed to love it. They may dislike it enough to remember," she said. He moved half a step closer. "If they do not, we will be enough for the minutes between." "They are long minutes," she said, "but I think I can live in them." He lifted her left hand, the gloved one. He did not kiss it this time. He pressed his own thumb lightly to the base where the pulse labors and is comforted by company. Her heart adjusted again, obedient. A bell called from somewhere beyond, as if the morning itself had been given orders. Edwin's gaze flicked past her shoulder. Her sense of the world widened to include more than the two of them and the breath between them. They walked together to the inner doors. There, courtesy separated them. He went to take his place at the hall's head. She found the place where she was meant to stand, not quite within the first line of sight and not far enough back to be missed by people trained to miss what unsettled them. The line of women in pale colors arranged themselves into a fresco of virtue. The line of men in ribbons and grave faces made themselves into a wall. Outside, carriages arrived at a pace that would be called stately if the horses had not been glad to be out of their stalls. The wind kept its hands to itself. The Golden Hall waited like a beast that has learned patience. An usher moved down the line, arranging sleeves that were already straight, whispering instructions to people who did not need them, and skipping rows as if his eyes had not been taught for her. She let him. She tucked one more breath into her chest and felt its edges. The regent entered with the weather. He was a season, not a man, when he walked into that room. The princess mother took her place, her face the page upon which nothing was written, and everything could be. Lord Chancellor Harbury stood slightly behind the regent's chair, a ledger in his hand like a weapon disguised as a record. Lady Beatrice arrived exactly on time to be seen as punctual. Diamonds like fragments of a resolved argument nested at her throat. The Duchess of Ashburn made her entrance without heraldry, because the powerful sometimes volunteer humility in order to own it. Her mouth did not smile and did not smile. She placed herself where the light knew how to flatter. Rose's wrist throbbed under the glove, a small metronome that kept the measure of her resolve. She saw the princess mother's eyes pass over her and return. She saw Edwin at the foot of the dais, his back a line drawn straight and true. He turned and saw her. That was all. No nod, no dangerous signal, just the fact of sight, shared. It was enough. The trumpets readied, their bells lifting like flowers that attract attention by being unable to help themselves. The master of ceremonies cleared his throat with practiced gravitas. The hall gathered breath. Harbury stepped forward with the scroll. He unrolled it as if unmaking a binding, then bowed and presented it to the regent. The regent did not take it. He glanced at his son. Edwin stepped one pace forward, the space of a man taking responsibility for his voice. "I will ask for acknowledgement," he had said. He drew his breath to do it. Rose felt the moment collect around her like dew, and then draw tighter, like a knot. She reached into her reticule, folded fingers finding the linen square. It was cool against her palm, honest as ever. The trumpets lifted their mouths to the air, the hall drew its breath, and Rose stepped out of the line. She did not hurry. Speed would have turned the gesture into a flinch. She crossed the space between where servants end and history begins, with a step as measured as a clock's. The rustle of silk paused. The breath of the room lifted the fine hair at the nape of her neck and set it back down again. At the foot of the dais, she stopped. The gilded steps looked as if they could not remember a shoe that had scrubbed them. She opened her reticule and drew out the square of linen. It shone, not from wealth, but from being clean. She held it a moment, not aloft, not hidden. Then she laid it on the lowest step, white on gold, humble cloth on a place that expected velvet. She set it with care, smoothing one corner with the back of a gloved finger, as if making a bed fit for truth. She knelt, not to the regent's chair, to the man standing on the same floor she had crossed. She took Edwin's hand, the one that wore the old signet, and lowered her head enough to press her lips to the cold metal, a kiss so brief it might have been only breath. She felt the crest against her skin, the cut lines of a kingdom outlasting skin. She rose from her knees enough to meet his eyes. "If I am to serve," she said, voice carrying because it was steady, not because it was loud, "let it be openly. If I am to stand beside you, let the standing be mutual." A fan fell from a hand somewhere to the left and struck the floor with the small final sound that joins endings to beginnings. Edwin's mouth did not move, but his eyes changed. They filled with something that did not belong to the hall. She slid the heavy ring from her own finger. For a moment it resisted, an old soldier unused to being guided. Then it yielded. She took his hand and, as if crowning duty with love, placed the signet where it was meant to be on his finger, fitting not by size but by right. The gesture reversed 100 years of rooms in which women were ornaments to vows men declared alone. Silence could be cruel. This one was not. It was attention discovering a better use for itself. The princess mother stood. She did not require a trumpet. She did not require anything but her own gravity. She took 2 steps that brought her within the field of the linen square and looked at it, and the looking itself repaired something. Her gaze moved to Rose, then to her son. "Service is the first law of the crown," she said. The words were simple. They landed without spectacle. "If the heir chooses a partner who understands service, I will not oppose him. I will instruct those who must be instructed to do likewise." She turned her head, and the regent met her eyes, husband and queen speaking a language of many winters. He inclined his head once, a bow to his son and to the moment. He did not take the scroll from Harbury. He did not need it. "Let it be recorded," he said, "that the heir has made his choice. Let it be known that the house receives it." Harbury's lip moved a fraction, the smallest evidence that the machinery within him did not pass from one gear to the next without grind. He bowed not to Rose, not to Edwin, but to the fact that the room had settled around a decision he could not unmake, without overturning a table he did not own. He stepped back and held the ledger lower. There is dignity in retreat when done correctly. He knew the choreography. Lady Beatrice stood very straight. Diamonds at her throat breathed with her. She came forward the exact number of steps required to be gracious and no more. She curtsied to the regent, to the princess mother, and then flawlessly to Rose. The movement cost her nothing she would miss. It gave back to Rose something the ballad had tried to take. The Duchess of Ashburn, who had practiced the art of not losing in rooms where victory is limited to 2 people, lifted her chin. Her smile managed the miracle of being both sympathetic and proud. Later, a note would travel under her seal to the council citing a decline in health that made travel unwise and public celebrations unkind. Her daughter's future would be spoken of with warmth to other men in other rooms. Appearances would be kept so intact that no one would trip on them. From the right, a stir went through the line of servants that was not gossip. It was relief locating a place to sit. A woman in an aproned cap pressed a hand to her mouth, and then remembered where she was and let it fall, smoothing her skirt instead. A footman whose shoulders had carried too many trays nodded once to himself, because some days the world chooses fairness for 5 minutes, and that is worth noticing. The princess mother glanced to an equerry and spoke without words. That look, carried down the chain of competence, arrived as a hushed inquiry at the servants' hall that evening, and again the next morning, when the girl with the tray was brought in, shaking and protected from her own panic by Mrs. Penbury's square hands and square voice. It had been an accident. It had been made more likely by a supervisor who wished to be seen to have zeal. The supervisor discovered himself reassigned to a remote place where zeal could not scold anyone. The girl kept her position. She learned to carry the weight of silver without listening to the voices that applauded when she faltered. Word went out, as it always does, not in decrees but in phrases that found ears. The regent had nodded, the princess mother had spoken. The heir had not only chosen, he had been chosen back. The ballad in Beatrice's rooms learned a new line. A story that had been told to serve as a warning began to be told to children as a puzzle. Which is heavier, gold or linen? The answer pleased those who liked to be clever and comforted those who do not. The court found its manners. It had always had them. Now it used them for their purpose. Ladies whose smiles had shown too much tooth learned to lower their lips. Men who had coughed at the wrong moments discovered a healthier habit of silence. Conversations sprouted phrases like practical and fitting and example, each one a small bridge over what had felt like a chasm. A bishop observed to anyone who would listen that a marriage without humility was like a prayer without breath. No one argued with bishops in public. Edwin stood with Rose at the base of the dais. He did not raise their hands. He did not make a picture for painters. He turned slightly so that when he spoke to her, the room could not claim ownership of the words. "Thank you," he said. "I did not do it for thanks," she answered. "I know," he said, "that is one reason I mean it." The princess mother descended one step and then another, making of the movement not a concession but a teaching. She stopped beside the linen square. "Miss Hartwell," she said, using the name as if it were a door she opened with courtesy. "You will find the household capable of being improved. You will also find it capable of improving you." "Permit both. I will try," Rose said. She felt the place at the base of her thumb pulse against the glove. She did not press it. She wanted to feel this. The regent's voice carried again, wrapping the hall in ceremony so that the moment could be placed where memory would not lose it. He spoke of duty and of the pattern of generations, and the way promise repeats itself in a nation the way the sea repeats along a shore, without growing bored of the work. He did not speak long. He did not need to. When he sat, the hall released its breath and the formal applause rose, measured and sincere enough to be convincing. In quiet rooms nearby, someone sent for the goldsmith. The ring would be sized properly. For the day, the signet remained on Edwin's finger where Rose had placed it. It caught light that had not been assigned to it, and wore it comfortably. Rumour, that small animal always hungry, changed its diet. It began to tell how Rose had laid her apron on the steps where velvet goes, how the princess had blessed it with 2 steps of her own, how the chancellor had blinked so slowly a person could have walked to the river and back before his eyes were done. It told how Lady Beatrice had bent like water, and how the Duchess's carriage had been seen leaving the mews with no one inside but the coachman's good sense. It told, and in the telling, it changed what people thought they knew about what was possible. By afternoon, Mrs. Penbury went about her rounds with the air of a woman whose advice had not lost its edge in polishing. She found Rose in the corridor and did not embrace her. She tightened a loose hairpin with the efficiency of someone fixing a hinge that keeps a door from swinging too wide. "Stand," she said under her breath, and Rose did, and the world fit. In the servants' hall, Hetty practiced curtsies without being told, and discovered one that did not make her feel small. In the guardroom, a soldier said to another that he would not mind if his daughter went in for service, if service could be what it had looked like for 5 minutes in the Golden Hall. In the kitchens, the cook swore at a pie, and then swore again because she was suddenly weeping and could not say why. When the light shifted on the river, and the castle threw its long shadow over the lawns like a benediction, Rose sat by a window and let her pulse catch up to the day. The bandage itched. The glove hid it. She pressed her hand to the pocket of her apron and felt 2 notes at war come to a kind of truce. She took them out, folded the Chancellor's command until it was smaller than it thought it could be, and slipped it behind the vicar's card she had kept from a long-ago funeral because it had felt important to have the name of someone who understood endings. She reread Edwin's line about dawn and let the word widen until it felt like a room she could live in. The Golden Hall, back to gold and echo, held no more crowds for the day. The linen square lay in her reticule again, and when she touched it she could still feel the cold of the gilded step in its threads. The step would remember, so would she. Evening found the Princess Mother with a hawthorn twig in a porcelain vase on her writing table. She looked at it and smiled once, not at anyone. She took up a pen, wrote a brief instruction concerning the unfortunate incident with tea, and another regarding the tone to be kept in the ladies' gatherings for a time. She set the pen down. She folded her hands. She rested, a queen who had earned an hour. By night the castle had made a new story that fit with its old ones. Tomorrow would have its own noise. Tonight, the hall had chosen an answer, and kept it. And in a narrow room lit by a small candle, Rose Hartwell laid her apron in a drawer and closed it gently, her hand lingering on the wood as if making a pact with it. The sea came in mild as breath that morning, and the sky held a pale blue that made room for bells. The chapel was a small white thing tucked into a fold of the coast, its door painted a patient green. Hawthorn hedged the path, thorned and blooming, as if the season itself had decided to bless them by arriving early with flowers and difficulty both. Rose stood in the narrow vestry, the window open to salt and gulls. Mrs. Penbury fussed with her veil as if taming wind. The dress was simple, muslin with a stitch or two of lace that looked like small waves along the bodice. Her scar, neat now and pale where the scald had been, showed just below her glove. She did not hide it. She had tucked a folded square of linen into the pocket of her travelling cloak, not to be worn, not to be seen, only to tether mourning to the day the hall had chosen fairness. "You are very steady," Mrs. Penbury murmured, pinning the last pin, "as if your bones had agreed among themselves to behave." "They have," Rose said softly. "I told them this was not a performance." "It is," Mrs. Penbury said, smiling the way a mother smiles when a child discovers a truth and thinks herself the first. "But it is one you may enjoy." The Princess Mother waited outside the vestry door with a bouquet of hawthorn and rosemary. She wore grey that remembered lavender. She looked at Rose as if measuring a seam and finding it true. "For remembrance and courage," she said, offering the bouquet. Then lower so that it was conversation and not proclamation. "I am glad. Thank you," Rose said, and because plain words can be a jewel when they carry weight, the two of them needed none else. The Princess Mother touched Rose's cheek with a gloved hand and stepped back, a queen who knew when to let love be seen. The vicar cleared his throat in the nave, not because he wished to be heard, but because all knaves require a cough to begin their work. Edwin stood by the chancel rail in a coat that had learned to be beautiful without noise. His signet caught a shard of light and let it go again, as if aware that it belonged to a ceremony older than itself. He did not turn until the door opened. When he did, his face became the place where she would live. Rose walked on the arm of no man, and every morning she had survived. She came down a short aisle that might as well have been the length of her life and stopped beside him. He leaned a fraction, hardly anything, enough to say without the risk of speech, "I am here." The service took words that had been said by thousands and made them theirs. The vicar spoke of love as a habit made out of hours, and of vows like rain that does the same work every day until gardens remember how to be generous. When it came time for their voices, Edwin steadied as if it had been made for this moment. He promised to protect without patronizing, to cherish without caging, to listen when silence was easier. Rose promised to steady when storms had their way, to speak when quiet had turned into cowardice, to choose truth even when it did not look like a picture in a window. The ring, fitted at last, slid onto her finger and found its home with a certainty that surprised them both. Her hand trembled. His covered it until it forgot to shake. When the blessing fell, it fell like soft weather, and the amen felt like a door opened onto plain ground. They stepped outside into sea air, bright with gulls and sun that knew how to be kind. No parade waited, only a handful of faces that had earned their right to be near. Mrs. Penbury's eyes shone like polished pew ends. The princess mother watched with a composure that did not hide joy. A hawthorn twig shook in her bouquet as if agreeing. A loyal footman who had once sliced his palm on a decanter and been given vinegar by a new maid wiped his eyes with the back of his hand and pretended the wind had meddled with him. "Well," Edwin said, voice low, as if testing how the word would sound when it was not followed by should or must. "Better than any room," Rose said, "because the ceiling is the sky." He laughed, a sound like a man who had looked at duty for years and finally saw its friendly face. He looked toward the shore, where the tide was leaving patterns like lace on sand, then back at her. "Walk with me," he said, "as you are." "Always," she answered, "as I am." They went down to the pebbles, shoes in hand, the cold stinging them awake and alive. He told her the names of the ships he could see. Cutter, yawl, sloop, words that liked their own precision. She told him the names of herbs that grew along the cliff, thrift, sea campion, scurvy grass, words that survived by paying attention. He bent to pick up a small flat stone and skipped it once. It hopped and sank, perfect in its modesty. He held out his hand then, palm upward, without the weight of ceremony, the simplest of offerings. She placed her fingers in his and did not take them back. The evening found them at a modest inn, whose windows looked out on a harbour that was not trying to be beautiful, and therefore was. The wedding meal was a stew that had learned patience on a low fire, bread with a good crust, a bottle of wine chosen for the day rather than for a list. The vicar raised a glass and sat, Mrs. Penbury raised none and sat. The princess mother sipped like a woman used to counting sips, and set the stem down with a smile that would be remembered by the innkeeper's wife to the end of her days. Later, in the small room meant for two, the air was warm with candle and quiet. Edwin stood at the window with his coat off, his shirt open at the throat, a man without witnesses. Rose placed the folded apron in the drawer of the writing table the inn provided, as if to say, "This object tells the truth about the path we took." She ran a fingertip over the wood once, as if sealing a pact with grain and time. He turned. "Do you miss it?" he asked. "Not the work, the safety of the old meaning, the way a task keeps a person upright. I do not miss erasing myself to make rooms smooth," she said. "Work I will always have. Today proved it." She lifted her bandaged wrist. He crossed the room at once, not with worry, but with the focused care of a man who knows pain when it belongs to the person he loves. He took her hand, unfastened the glove, and kissed the scar, not to heal it, not to erase it, but to admit it. "It will fade," he said. "I hope it does not entirely," she answered. "It keeps me honest." She looked at his ring, big with history and quiet now on his finger. "And that keeps you. That keeps me," he agreed. "The ring, and the woman who placed it there." He kissed her then, not greedy, not hesitant. A question asked and asked again, because that is what love does with time. She drew him closer by the simple act of standing where she wished to stand. Passion lived in small choices. The way his hand cupped her jaw and then fell to her shoulder and stayed. The way her breath found his and matched it. The way they both smiled when they remembered they had the right to forget the world for an hour. The window made a square of moonlight on wood. The sea made a sound like consent against the quay. They rested their foreheads together when they parted a little, as if checking the fit of a life. "Tomorrow," he said, already knowing the answer. "We go back." "Yes," she said, "we go back to teach mornings to behave." When they returned to the castle, it received them not as a spectacle, but as a place newly apprenticed to truth. The household had learned its steps and did not stumble over them as often. The princess mother's writing desk kept its hawthorn twig, replaced with a fresh one when the old had finished reminding. In the servants' hall, Hetty tied her apron with a firmer hand and passed on 2 rules to the youngest. "Count to 3, and do not let laughter decide who you are. In the ladies' gatherings, the tea is poured to the brim a little less often, and when it is, someone says gently, 'That will spill,' and another answers, 'Then let us make room.' Dawn lessons did not stop. They changed shape. Rose and Edwin took them together in the orangery or in the library, under lamps that made puddles of gold on blue cloth. He taught her the language of papers that move countries 1 inch at a time. She taught him the language of rooms that look empty and are full of feelings that will not sign their names. He discovered that the right question can move a man who believes himself a stone. She discovered that patience is not a silent thing, but a practice of speaking at the right time. He apologized badly twice to a gardener, and once perfectly to a laundress. She scolded one earl in the tone she used to save a pot from boiling over, and watched him lower the heat. There were balls. They danced one set per night together, and then surrendered to duty with a grin they did not hide. He kept his stride a hair shorter to keep their steps in ease. She found that a waltz is made of balance and trust, like almost everything else. When music stopped, he looked for her first, not because he doubted her, but because the habit of finding each other had become his most useful method of breathing. In a drawer in her new writing desk, the apron lay folded, not to be forgotten, not to be displayed like a relic. She opened the drawer on hard days and let the sight of it lift her ribs enough to make room for air. On good days, she opened it for gratitude. The signet's weight on his hand reminded both of them to choose service over spectacle, when the choice tried to hide behind pretty words. Once, in the Golden Hall again, this time for a small ceremony that had made it into the calendar, because the Princess Mother had that power when she wished, Lady Beatrice crossed to Rose with a curtsy that had lost its edge. "We are all," Beatrice said, smiling slightly, "learning at last." Rose curtsied in return, neither deep nor shallow. "We are," she said, and meant it. Beatrice laughed low. "Do be kind to our slowness," she murmured. "We were taught marble instead of muscle." "I will be kind to your trying," Rose answered. The two women did not become friends. They became something steadier, participants in a new rule. Years would come, and with them tasks, and with tasks, small accidents and corrections. People would change their minds slowly and swear they had always believed such things. Children would be told the story of the apron on the step and ask, puzzled and pleased, if anyone had really thought cloth and gold could not converse. But before years there was that first wedding day, and the walk to the sea, and the vow spoken in a chapel with salt in the air. And now to you who listened, there will always be halls that prefer the shine of surfaces to the shine of souls. There will always be voices that laugh so that they do not have to see. Courage is not thunder. It is the breath you take before stepping where no one like you has stepped, and the next breath when you are looked at for doing it. Choose the life you can live with when the crowd goes home and the room is dark. Find the hand that steadies you and offer yours to steady in return. If you do, you will teach even golden rooms to listen, and love will feel in any century like a door quietly opening to let you through. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.